Hello everybody, welcome you all to this lecture. Today we're going to talk about T.S. Eliot's biography. Since in this semester, as a part of literary criticism, we're going to learn one of his seminal essays titled Tradition and the Individual Talent. So that's actually, we would like to know a little bit about his life and his work and his contribution to the literary world, so that it will facilitate us to understand the text, the tradition and the individual talent. So let's start. You can see this is some information about Mr. T.S. Eliot. Just at a glance, you can see he was born on September 26, 1888 in St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States of America, and he died on January 4, 1965 in London. And he was an English author, poet, critic, playwright, editor, and publisher. T.S. Eliot, American English author, was one of the most significant poets writing in English in the 20th century, as well as one of the most influential critics and interesting playwright, editor, and publisher. Now let's talk about something about his youth. Eliot's grandfather, William Greenleaf Eliot, who was a Unitarian minister and the founder of his schools and the university, and see the name of the university is Washington University in St. Louis, and also he founded lots of charities. And he was a family patriarch, or you can see the leader of his family. And their family, actually, they are from New England, and they always maintained that ties or connection with New England, and very jealously they guarded this connection with New England. I mean, they're very proud of their place that they came from. T.S. Eliot claimed that he was the child of both the Southwest and New England. In Massachusetts, he missed Missouri's Dark River, cardinal birds, and lush vegetation. In Missouri, he missed the fir trees, song sparrows, red-cried shrubs, and blue sea of Massachusetts. So here you can see that actually he was talking about all the natural beauties that he used to enjoy while actually he was in Massachusetts, in New England. You can see one of his photographs from his youth. Okay, now let's talk about a little bit about his education. In St. Louis, young Eliot received a classical education privately and at the Smith Academy. So that was the name of the school, originally named Eliot Academy later on. He composed and read the valedictory poem for his graduation in 1905. Valedictory means actually when students graduate, and out of all the students, one of the students, mostly the smartest one, or you can see who scored highest marks. So usually they're invited to give the farewell speech to all the students, parents, and their teachers on behalf of all the students, of course. After a year at Milton Academy in Massachusetts, he went to Harvard University in 1906. Eliot was shy and independent, and he made a good impression as a contributor and editor of the Harvard Advocate. He completed a Bachelor of Arts degree in 3 years, so it took only his bachelor degree at Harvard. And Eliot stayed at Harvard to earn a Master of Arts in Philosophy, and that was interrupted by a year. And later on, he went to Paris and then started studying in Sorbonne University, which is now called the University of Paris, and of course it is in France. And again, he returned to Harvard in 1911, but in 1914, he went overseas again on a Harvard scholarship to study in Germany. So you can see his education life is quite, you can see there are lots of variation. So he studied at Harvard, then later on he studied in Sorbonne, or the University of Paris now, and then also he studied in Germany. In the meantime, when actually the First World War actually started in 1914, then he transferred to Merton College, and Merton College is in Oxford. That means he started studying in Oxford University, and there at Oxford actually he met Ezra Pound, he, you know, Ezra Pound, actually, he was another expatriate, one of the expatriate poets, and he was also a correspondent. That means he was a journalist. He was working for several magazines, and he was he was working as a correspondent for all those magazines. Those are in USA. And Ezra Pound, he influenced him a lot, and they became friends for the rest of their life. So, and they shared a commitment to learning and poetry. And you know, one of his very famous poems, "The Wasteland," and also the love song of the Georgette before. All these poems were, you know, I mean, actually, they were edited by Ezra Pound, because T.S. Eliot, when actually he finished writing those poems, he gave those to Ezra Pound, and then later on Ezra Pound edited and he gave them the right shape. So now actually we have the complete work, the love song of Prufrock, and also The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. And at first, actually, T.S. Eliot, he took his poem, The Love Song of Georgette Prufrock, to different publishers, but all of them, they rejected. They didn't want to publish it. But later on, he sent his work, I mean his poem, to Ezra Pound. Then later on, Ezra Pound asked the editor of the poetry, because he had a connection, and he requested them to publish the poem, and later on it was published, and it was highly appreciated, I mean, among the literary circle in England and also in USA. All right, now let's jump to the next slide. Now, after Oxford, Eliot decided to stay in England, and in 1915, T.S. Eliot married Vivian Haywood. He taught at Highgate Junior School for Boys near London, and he taught there from 1915 to 1916, and then worked for the famous Lloyd's Bank. While teaching, he completed his dissertation, and the title of his dissertation was Knowledge and Experience in the Philosophy of F.H. Bradley. But interesting thing is that he sent the his dissertation to his university, and it was accepted, but he didn't go, and he didn't defend it. I mean, he didn't participate in this doctoral defense, and that's actually he didn't receive his doctorate. Now, these are the list of some of his poems written by T.S. Eliot, and you can see, of course, the number. The very first one is Prufrock and Other Observations. It was published in 1917. Then Poems, 1919. Then later on, you can see the whole list of works. Actually, I don't want to go through all this, all the names of the poems. You can read it yourself if you're interested. And of course, he was also a playwright, and some of his plays were very famous. So he was not only a poet, also he's a playwright. And one of his most famous, and which is highly appreciated in the literary circle, the second one, the title is Murder in the Cathedral. It was published in 1935. And also The Cocktail Party and The Confidential Clock, published in 1953. And The Elderly Statesman, it was published in 1959. So all these are his famous plays. And of course, prose. So prose writing. Here you can see. The very first one is Ezra Pound, his metric and poetry. It was published in 1917. Then Circuitude, Home to John Dryden, Dante, John Dryden, the poet, the dramatist, the critique. It was published in 1932. The list of poetry and use of criticism. So all these are his very famous prose writings, you can see. Among his early poetry, when the United States entered World War I in 1917, Eliot tried to join the US Navy, but was rejected for physical reasons. That year, his first volume of poetry, Prufrock and Other Observations, appeared and almost immediately became the focus for discussion and debate. And Eliot actually, especially in the love song of Georgette Prufrock, which was also very highly appreciated by Ezra Pound himself, you can see he found it very interesting, because Ezra Pound found that that poem actually, it relates to the present situations. I mean, during the First World War, what was going on at that time, because both the poets actually, they were disillusioned by the war and what is going on all around. So it actually focuses on the last son of Alfred Buford. It focuses on the confusion and the bad feelings of the world. So all these things are noted there. So you can see the psychological dilemma, psychological problem, hesitation. All these things are recorded in the poem "The Last Son of Alfred Buford." So, and it became very famous at that time. And also, still, it is regarded as one of the most important modern poems. Eliot also served as a literary editor, the magazine titled Egoist, and it is a feminist magazine. And from 1970 to 1919, actually, he was editor of this magazine. The back pages of the Egoist were written by a series of young poet editors, and here, with the aid of Ezra Pound, the new poetry and commentary was written. Now, as a critic, let's see what was his contribution. Eliot was also writing anonymous reviews for the London Times and publishing essays. And most of his very famous essays are here, especially in the first two, and both of them were published in 1919. So two of his most influential pieces appeared. The first one is Tradition and the Individual Talent, which is one of the texts for this semester as a part of the literary criticism discourse. And also Hamlet and His Problems. So these are very famous two essays written by T.S. Eliot. And some of his early critical essays were The Sacred Ode. It was published in 1920. Then Homage to John Dryden, 1934. Philippic Essays, 1917 to 1932. It was published in 1932. The Use of Poetry and the Use of Criticism, 1933. Now, let's talk about something about his religious and cultural views. The first thing actually we're going to talk about his citizenship. This is very interesting. He was an American poet, but later on he went to England, UK, for his study purpose, and then he stayed there. And he applied for British citizenship. So here you can see in one of his letters, and it was written to his brother, and it was written in 25th October 1927. And this is an excerpt, or you can suggest a line collected from one of his letters written to his brother. He says, "I have applied for naturalization and been accepted, having pulled a few strings with the Home Secretary." So you see, he tried hard, because you see he has used the word having pulled a few strings. That means he had to use some, he had to influence the Home Secretary to give him the citizenship. So on the 2nd of November 1927, T.S. Eliot was granted a certificate of naturalization. The following day, he swore an oath of allegiance to King George V, his heirs and successors, thereby becoming a naturalized British citizen. This entitled him to all political and other rights, powers and privileges, and be subject to all obligations, duties and liabilities to which a natural-born British subject is entitled or subject, and have to all intents and purposes the status of a natural-born British subject. So that means he will enjoy all the rights, and also he has to, you can say, he has to, meet the obligations and duties and liabilities to the British nation, because now he has become a British citizen. Now here you can see, this is very interesting, you can see it here, T.S. Eliot's certificate of naturalization, and it was granted, I've already told you that 2nd November 1927. You can see it is written there, though it's not that much clear because it's a very old document. It says Thomas Stance Eliot, his full name, and the rest of the things you can read it yourself if you're interested in. Okay, now we can move on to the next. Alright, now religious and cultural views, it continues. Now, in 1927, Eliot became an Anglo-Catholic and a British citizen. And in After Strange Gods, it's a title of the book, you see that, After Strange Gods. It was published in 1934. And this book, actually, it was based on his essays, which was written in 1917. 70s, we have already talked about, that is tradition and the individual talent. So he used the idea of the tradition and individual talent in his book After Strange Gods. He also declared that too many free-thinking Jews would damage the kind of Christian culture he proposed. So you see, he became Anglo-Catholic and he was a devout Christian. So some people actually, they say that he was a kind of anti-Semitic, but it is, contestable or debatable because no direct reference we can get from his writing. But there are some references, but in a very vague way, or vague manner, you can say that in his work. Okay, now this work, the title is The Idea of a Christian Society. It was published in 1939 and notes to a definition of culture. These two works indicated Eliot's stand against the pluralistic society of modern Western democracies. So, since actually he was, he was very close to a Puritan, in his belief, a true devoted, you can say, Christian. So that's actually he didn't, appreciate this pluralistic society. That society allows freedom of religion, because he thought that Jewish people, if they were granted the right to practice their religion, in England, then it might cause some problems in the British social fabric. So that's actually, he didn't like this kind of practice, like pluralistic society in Western democracies. We can skip some of this. If you're interested, you can just pause the video and then you can read it by yourself. Also jump to the, here you are. Now I'd like to talk about a few things from here, from this slide 24. In 1935, Murder in the Cathedral. So that's the title. I told you that Murder in the Cathedral is one of his famous plays, and it was published in 1935. And that's why you see that perhaps Eliot's best play was produced at Canterbury Cathedral. It has to do with Archbishop Thomas Becket, who was assassinated before the altar there in 1170. So it was based on the assassination of Archbishop Thomas Becket. The plot, actually, it was based on it. There is another one, The Family Reunion, the first of Eliot's 4 professional plays, appeared in 1939. This was followed by other plays like The Cocktail Party, 1940, The Confidential Clerk, 1954, and The Elderly Statesman, 1959. In 1947, Eliot's first wife died. In 1948, he received the Nobel Prize and the British Order of Merit. And the list of his honors continued to grow. After the four portraits, he committed himself to the poetic drama with On Poetry and Poets, 1957, and the editing of collections of his poetry and plays. In 1957, Eliot married his private secretary, Valerie Fisher, and remained married until his death on January 4, 1965 in London. His ashes were placed in St. Michael's Church, East Corker, his ancestral village, on April 17, 1965. Here you can see, that's the plaque. Now, many poets and artists paid final tribute to T.S. Eliot, including Ezra Pound, and he said that a grand poet and brotherly friend. That was his, you can see, his sentence that he used for his friend, T.S. Eliot. A committed Christian in an important age. Eliot tried to restore the religious roots of European and American culture. His career recalls the flexible writer of the 18th century. Now let's talk about a little bit of his personality, and sometimes you can find that his personality, it was a little bit weird or strange, on occasions. But anyway, it's not possible to talk about, all of his personality, but a little bit of it, actually, I would like to put here, so that we can have some idea about his features and about his characteristics. The life of T.S. Eliot and the character of the man is often painted as a highly serious one in the various biographies of him. And it's true that Eliot can be highly serious, intellectually challenging, and a bit of a snob. Snob means, you can say, I mean, those who have very, you can say, something special, something high idea, or you can say they have some lofty ideas about themselves, that they are the best, or they are from the upper class. So they're very conscious about their class, that they are from upper class or upper society. They belong to upper society. So we call them snob. Those who are very much conscious about it. And it is reported that actually he used to call ordinary people termites, so which is very interesting. You know what is termites, and what is termites. Okay, but I mean, these are all different kinds of, you can say, some not that much important information about him, but still you can get some idea about his person. But this is not all about his personality. For instance, he enjoyed detective fiction and wrote an essay on Wilkie Collins and Dickens in his selected essays. So he loved to read. In 1927, he reviewed some 24 detective novels in his own journal, the Criterion, that was the name of his journal. One of Eliot's party tricks was to recite long passages of Sherlock Holmes from memory. So actually when he went to different parties, so he used to quote long passages from Sherlock Holmes from memory, and that was a trick. He just wanted to fascinate people with his quotation from Sherlock Holmes, and this is really interesting. And although many consider Eliot as a cultural snob, his tastes went to both ends of cultural spectrum. For example, when Mary Lloyd, the celebrated comedian and a star of the working class London music hall, died, Eliot wrote a glowing obituary of her. So you can see here, I mean, Mary Lloyd, actually she was a comedian, and she was the star of the working class, not for the upper class. But still he wrote a glowing obituary of her. Obituary means, as you can see on the newspaper, people write something about when people dies, especially on the newspaper, they write some good words, and also they express their condolences to the bereaved families, all these things, with some, sometimes they also mention, I mean, the dead person's achievements and his contribution to the society, if he's a very famous person indeed. Now, Eliot went to work for the publishing firm Faber and Guerd in 1925, the firm that would shortly become Faber and Faber. You know, this is a very famous publication house. Still, we have Faber and Faber there in England, and they're a very famous publication house, just like Penguin Classics. Eliot's name would become synonymous with the publishing house for the next 40 years. That means he worked there almost 40 years in that publication house. Eliot was a consummate professional at the firm, and he would help to give a string of poets a much needed break. Those would include W.H. Auden and Ted Hughes and others. So he would like to give break to the, I mean, the upcoming stars, or you can say the writers. He would like to give opportunities to the brilliant writers. So I already have mentioned two names like W.H. Auden and Ted Hughes. But there was also a mischievous side of him, to him. He once broke up a boat meeting at Faber on 4th of July by setting off a bucket full of firecrackers between the chairman's legs. So this is very interesting. I mean, he took a bucket full of firecrackers and then he put that bucket full of firecrackers between the chairman's legs, and then you know what happens then. So Eliot was also a huge fan of Groucho Marx. He wrote the comedian a fan letter and kept a picture of him on his wall. So which is interesting. I mean, a snob like him, the way actually we said he was a snob, or cultural snob, that he would keep a picture, I mean, someone else's picture on his wall, which is quite unusual. That was the, I mean, the strangest thing about his personality. Okay, now the charges of anti-Semitism. We'd like to finish our lecture with this one. Here it says that the question is, what anti-Semitic? Critics and biographers remain divided on the answer, and the evidence seems to rest on less than favorable references to Jewish people in a handful of poems, notably Jeronshum, Burbank with a Baedeker, Balestein with a cigar, and early drafts of the Wasteland and I told you that the wasteland actually, when it was written as a draft, it was sent to Ezra Pound, and then Ezra Pound cut off some of the lines that he found unsuitable. And T.S. Eliot, he didn't mind, because he sent it to Ezra Pound to be edited so that it can have a good shape. So now the wasteland today actually we are reading, that is the shape, and we can also find the contribution of Ezra Pound for this perfection. Okay, so all these writings, people say that there is some kind of anti-Semitic element in this text, but I told you earlier that there is still, it is, I mean, the people have contest about it. I mean, it's debatable that whether actually really he was anti-Semitic or not. There's also controversial references to free-thinking Jews in a book of Eliot's American Lectures After Western Gods, a book which Eliot allowed to fall out of print. I mean, he didn't want to reprint the book anymore, that book After Western Gods. So also here actually you can find some kind of comment on the free-thinking Jews, and of course it was negatively actually. He commented against the Jewish people, those who were staying in England and other parts of Europe. So this kind of unfavorable references you can find in some of his works, and sometimes people say that he was a little bit anti-Semitic, but still we cannot be sure in that way that whether actually he was anti-Semitic or he was against the Jews. That is not sure about. We're not sure about it in that sense. So that's all about from me for the time being. Still, if you have any question and if you have any queries, you can ask me any questions. You can text me, you can mail me, and you know how to get through those. And you have my number also, so you can also call me or you can also text me if you really feel. And those who are interested to read more about T.S. Eliot, so here is a list of reference. You can go through these. You can go to these articles. They are available online, so you can find more information about T.S. Eliot and his life. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and I will come back soon with another lecture, and this time it will be on the tradition and the individual talent. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Take care.